Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here. I learned a lot already. And I'm going to talk about the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. And as Alan was just saying, I will talk from a very human aspect. It is a very complex accident, and so I will keep it to be focused on what happened at the plant and also what human and organizational factors analysis concluded. I will talk about the lessons learned in respect to human and organizational factors. And then I will talk about what maybe you could learn from those lessons learned, because I do believe that it comes down to the human aspect, which is the same in every industry. So, as we talk about the human aspect, let us put it into our minds, frame our minds into that notion. How it was to be a TEPCO employee at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the 11th of March, 2011. Okay, so how many of you in this room have experienced an earthquake which is higher than 5.0 on the Richter scale? Raise a hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. A few of you. Okay. So let us see and listen to what it sounded like. This is a recording from the actual earthquake that occurred the 11th of March, 2011. Scary. Gives me goosebumps. This is what it looked like in the main buildings at the power station. As you can see, it was a lot of devastations. And here is a graph that gives you a little bit of an idea what it feels like for those who haven't experienced an earthquake. The earthquake itself was 9 on the Richter scale, and as you know, it's a logarithmic scale, so each step is 10 times stronger. And what it says here on the graph, it says that it's impossible to stand up when it's 7.0. You will fall down, you can almost not crawl or move because the ground is shaking so violently. So I think you get the idea what it must have felt like when for the TEPCO staff who were at the site and also the contractors, of course. Just a little more information. The 11th of March, the aftershocks, they had 180 aftershocks that was higher than 5.0, 38 that was over 6.0, and 3 that was over 7.0. So you can imagine almost every minute there was a big movement of the ground where they were standing on. The first week when the accident happened, they had 463 aftershocks that was higher than 5.0. Can you imagine to work in those conditions? To get your mind clear, to have good situational awareness? So the operator units were safe, the one that was operating were safely automatically shut down. The operators started to follow the procedures, just as they were trained.
At the time when the tsunami arrived, I saw the lamps on the unit number 1 and 2 power panels flicker and then all went out at once. The diesel generator stopped and lamps started to go out one by one. I had no idea what was happening. In the main control room, the light on the unit 2 side went completely out and the unit 1 side was lit by emergency lighting, very dim lighting. All the alarms went off and for a moment the entire main control room was silent. I doubted whether I was seeing was reality or not.
Could you imagine to be the shift manager in the control room? Something happens that cannot happen because there are backup systems. You do have these diesel generators, you have redundancy with batteries, and this cannot just happen. Everything went black. All the parameters, everything on the panel just disappeared. And it took some time before they really realized what happened. Because as you know, in a control room, you don't have windows. All what you can see and understand is on front of you on the panels. You cannot see what happens in the stations, you cannot feel it, and you cannot hear it. So of course, this was a fundamental surprise for the people in the control room. Oops. And here is another picture from the control room in darkness. They actually took car batteries into the control room, trying to restore some of the most safety important parameters. And you also see that one is working here with a full face mask, because the radiation levels were increasing after a while. This is a picture of the first wave, the tsunami wave that came at 1527, and it was 13 meters high. The second wave arrived 1535. The seawall that should protect the station was built for 5.7 meters. So it was enormous power of that force without water that all flooded the station. Here is a graph from a presentation made by Akira Cavano from TEPCO, showing all the water and how much it was flooding. Here is another picture showing the wave and how it went all through the turbine building down to the emergency diesels, which you see down there, which was totally flooded. And that's why they had no electricity at all. And as I said, the people were working at the station, and I will let you listen to some quotes. There is a TEPCO report, and they have a section of the Appendix 2, which is called Voices in the Field. And you will hear some of the quotes of people from TEPCO, and it's recorded by a Japanese colleague, Professor Akira Omoto. So let us listen to the recording to see what they experienced.
When we were about halfway down the corridor, the fire alarm went off and we turned back, sensing a danger. Then suddenly, the lights went out and we could hear that the diesel generator had stopped. We just started running when suddenly a large amount of water started pouring through the airtight door to the diesel generator room.
Another colleague of TEPCO was going to enter the security. And you know, between the glass doors, it was closed. And all of a sudden the tsunami came and he couldn't get anywhere. He was trapped between the glass doors. Thankfully, a colleague that was close by saw it and he smashed the glass so he could escape. And this is his story. Next recording, thank you.
The water started to flood in from beneath, and I thought I was going to be drowned. I was saved when the water was up to my chin. I was scared.
And here are some pictures to give you the idea how much water came in. Okay, so as this wasn't enough, you remember the earthquake? You remember no electricity, no power, everything is shaking. You're trying to figure out what's happening. You're trying to mitigate, following procedures that doesn't fit the reality any longer. This is how it looked like. Then you have the hydrogen explosions. I think all of you have seen it on the television. So let us listen to another clip.
All of a sudden, the entire main control room was filled with a roar and shook vertically. The entire room was covered in a cloud of white dust. Everyone put on masks with a command, full face masks. There were people who even fell off their chairs. I left the service building and evacuated through the gate in between Unit 2 and 3. I could see the lever of Unit number 1. This was the first hydrogen explosion at Unit number 1. My radiation monitor measured about 10 millisievert.
So from now on, they needed to have full face masks when they were working. And of course, it's difficult to communicate. And also, when you need to eat or drink, you need to remove it, and you know that there is a risk for contamination because of the hydrogen explosion, the levels of radiation was higher. So let us listen to another recording, and there's different quotes one after each other.
Everywhere I could see had suffered from damage, and a copious amount of debris had been scattered around. Also, a heavy oil tank had been relocated and were blocking roads, and tons of cars had been turned over. The night was dark and eerily silent. The first thing I thought was that the site looked like as if it had been bombed. Perhaps it was because I was looking at everything through a full-face mask. It didn't seem real. It looked like I was watching the TV news or a movie. I couldn't accept that this is the same power station that only a few days ago I was walking around freely, breathing fresh air. We had undergone extensive training, but none of them was applicable. It was as if we had had our legs and arms cut off. The main control room and the plant was completely dark. I didn't know if my family was safe, and I didn't know what was happening outside of the plant.
So, coming back to what happened, they didn't have electricity, they have very little of communication abilities. They didn't know what happened with their families. Most of them have already evacuated. And they were still very brave, and they wanted to do whatever they could. There were 50 left, the so-called Fukushima 50, who were trying to do their very best to save the situation in the best way. So there is another one that I want you to listen to. Another recording, please.
Before going inside the plant, I took my ring off because I knew that if it was contaminated, I wouldn't be able to leave the plant with it. But then I put it on again. I was thinking to myself that if the worst thing did happen, they might need it to identify my body. I kept it also as a good luck charm. I opened and closed the suppression chamber spray valve and intake valve, and opened the dry well spray valves. But in addition to the fear of working in the dark with no scaffolding, I could also hear the sound of the safety relief valve and felt vibration. And I thought to myself, if steam leaks while I'm here, I will die. We asked operators to volunteer for containment venting work. A relatively young operator raised his hand, and my eyes welled up with tears. Since workers would have to go without knowing how high the radiation level was, we did not let him go. As a shift supervisor, I volunteered to go, but a colleague told me, stay here in command until the end. I bowed my head. I was speechless. I couldn't help but feel guilty.
I've talked to several of colleagues from TEPCO, and they still have guilt feelings about they couldn't save and do more, and also that they didn't do more before the accident. And it keeps on. The accident is still going on as we talk. They're still trying to mitigate with the melted cores, as you might know. I also talked with young staff from TEPCO, young operators that they were not on duty. They walked for hours because they couldn't go by car to join their colleagues and to fight and to do whatever they could to restore the situation as best as possible. Another thing that might also be interesting for you to know, as we have talked before about contractors, TEPCO was highly depending on contractors. They were asked to leave the plant. The Fukushima 50 didn't know where some of the equipment were stored. They were not used to operate some of the equipment neither. That also brought more complexity and difficulty for them to respond. They worked day and night. I talked to people who said that they worked until they collapsed. They were there for weeks. They couldn't leave, or they didn't want to leave, so they were staying at the plant and they were sleeping on the floor, getting some rest, and then they continued to work. And here's the last recording.
I was finally able to meet with my family at the evacuation center on March the 27th, 16 days after the start of the disaster.
So you might wonder, why do I show all this, and why do I want to share all this? Because it comes to the very human aspect. And I think we all failed to prevent this. Nobody should go through this. neither the staff at the plant or the neighboring people and the grounds that is now destroyed for long term. We really failed. And in my mind, I'm thinking also, we are spending so much time and resources on safety, but how effective are we? If we just multiply all the hours you put here today with your salaries, what this whole event costs, and then we multiply it with all the people around the world that is doing the same, and how effective are we? I think we need to be a little bit self-critical and think about how can we do this better. This time it was a nuclear accident. Next time it could be someone else in another industry. Let's hope it doesn't happen, but I think it probably will, because there is a part of this which is unexpected. This is some pictures of the control room. Unit 1 and 2 is one room, but this from one side of it, what it looked like. And this is the other side of the room, and just for you to compare with what it usually looks like. So, how could this happen? In Japan, of all countries. So advanced technology, so following procedures, so precise. How could it happen? We were tasked to figure that out when we were doing the IAEA Fukushima accident report. It's one report by the Director General, but it has 5 technical volumes. About 180 experts from all over the world was working hard for over 1.5 years to write up the report from 42 different member countries. And our team, we were tasked to look at how could this happen from a human organizational factor point of view, and a safety culture point of view. So we were trying to figure out the whys, and also to perform a systemic analysis, and of course also write about what can we learn from this. The team lead was Kathleen Heppel-Meises from the Canadian regulatory body, CNSC, and I was the technical lead supporting the team. And this was the other who were working together over 1 year, a little bit more than 1 year, for figuring out how could this happen. So the first observation that we made, that over the time, the stakeholders in Japan have created shared basic assumptions that the plants were inherently safe. Because there were so many backup systems, there were so much technical measures that so it could not happen. And in my mind, I've also been thinking, this is my personal view, a country that actually the only country who have the experience of 2 atom bombs, I think deep in their consciousness there's also, it must be 100% safe. I think that it really had an impact as well. Doesn't say so in the report, it's my own reflection. So I used 3 levels here of Edgar Schein, that you know that the basic assumptions, they form the values that finally influence our behaviors, but also the other way around. When we do think the same and we act the same, we are people, social, so we socialize and we do the same and we create the same values that goes down and become our basic assumptions. So it wasn't only the TEPCO who had that assumption. It was actually the public, the government, and the regulatory body. So they were all in the same boat, so to speak, and thinking it's 100% safe. They didn't want to, it's wrong to say didn't want to, because we think the team thought it's really such a basic assumption that it's not consciously. They didn't happen that they took backfitting in some safety improvements. So the lesson learned is that we need to question, what assumptions do we take about safety? So here are some questions. What tools do we have to enable and validate our shared assumptions that we have about it? Where are our blind spots? What do you take for granted in your area of expertise? What do you pay attention to, and what do you don't pay attention to? It's a way of trying to explore better your basic assumptions. But it's also a boundary of what we can comprehend. In the report we talk about the knowns, such as the tsunamis are correlated with seismic events that we know. And we know that we don't know that we cannot know exactly the height of the tsunami. We know that that interconnections allow cross-feeding of power from different units. We know that we can take power from one unit to another, that we know. But we know, unknown, that the diesels can start the duration and may be unpredictable. They may not start as they're supposed to do. And the minimum number of staff on site at the beginning of an accident is known, but we don't know how to deal with it when it's out of the thinking that we have estimated. So, and the psychological and physical conditions of the staff when something like this happens, we cannot really know that. We know that we don't know. And then we have the unknown unknowns. And it's there we have the fundamental surprise when they happen. Like the Fukushima Daiichi accident. They couldn't put all this together to understand that what could happen when they have a common cause failure as the tsunami, because the basic assumption was there, it cannot happen. So they were not prepared. So the lessons learned here is again that we need to think about the possibility for the unexpected. We need to be prepared to be unprepared. It's another way of thinking. It's towards resilience thinking. The other second observation is that all these different things together, we talked about the earthquake, we talked about the power, we talked about the hydrogen explosion, we talked about the contractors not there, the communication was not working, the trained and the procedures for the emergencies did not, the severe accident management guidelines did not fit reality, and so on. So all this together make the accident extremely complex and also creates a dynamic combination in a social technical systems, because we always have the three parts. We have the organizational factors, such as our visions, our knowledge management, how we contract people. We have the technical factors, of course, but we also have the human factors, what a human is capable, but also what constraints we have. So this make up a systemic social technical system. I skipped this. And it's not only in the organization, it's actually a systemic view on our different shareholders here. You have the governmental ministries where the regulator is connected to, which is related to the legal bodies, and you have media, you have the licensee, you have the lobbying groups, you have all these are interconnected as a system. And as I said before, in the case of Fukushima, there was this notion or the basic assumption that it cannot happen. We are 100% safe. The lessons 4 and 5 then is that we need to take a systemic approach. We need to understand if we do something here, how it actually can affect something there, and have to understand more of the complexity. And we need to give up the idea that we can create and make risk assessments for all possible events. We cannot. Next accident will be unexpected as well, because we have taken measures for what we know and we need to keep on doing that. Lesson number 6 and lesson number 7. How many in the room are coming from the regulatory body, from regulatory authorities? Can you raise your hand? 1, 3, 4. 4. Okay, I think you have something to work on here. It's good to see you here, but I think you need to have more people from the regulatory authorities to come and learn from this. In the nuclear industry, the first lesson learned here about the regulatory body's own safety culture and how that influenced the licensees was a big realization. Because the regulator did not have a very good safety culture itself. NISA was the name of the regulator. Today it's NRA. So there is more work to be done in that area. And the OECD, Nuclear Energy Agency, have, for instance, the member countries have started a new working group only for regulators that is working on their self-reflection about their own safety culture and how that influence the licensees. Of course, the licensee and the regulator and the governments needs to have a transparent and informed dialogue with the public on an ongoing basis. It's important. It's important also to have people who are against the industry also to say their sake. It's good and it's an important factor to improve. So what can we learn all of this? That the systemic approach is a complementary to all other safety approaches that we already are having. And that safety culture needs to continually question what do we take for granted? What do we pay attention to? And what is it that we don't pay attention to? We need to think about the unexpected. And we need to have that part of our safety approach, that there could be this unexpected event. And the good news is, if we do that well, we actually is doing good business as well. So it's an investment, it's not a cost. And as I said, prepare for the unexpected, or prepare to be unprepared, that's very difficult. Both the regulator, but also the licensees or the operator. And take into account the harsh, complex conditions that actually happens when you are in an emergency. So the drills and the training and the exercises is fitting that. Today, you can imagine the very complex and training and drills that is happening in the nuclear industry, not only in Japan. These have been radically improved. It's also important to take in research. I think sometimes we're a little bit reluctant to say, well, that's theory, that's academic, blah, blah, blah. But actually, there are people spending their lives in safety science, and we need to bring in more of that into our practices and bridge it to be practical methods and tools. Because this area is more than common sense. I used to say, it's not rocket science, it's behavior science. The regulatory body needs to acknowledge its role. As I said, what impact does it have on the industry's safety culture? And to keep on to have a good, transparent dialogue of the public. This is a long, messy, but I wanted to take the whole quote. This is from the biggest investigation of the Fukushima accident. They interviewed about 800 people, and it is a masterpiece. I think it's over 1,000 pages. But one of the conclusions that came out of this analysis is the acknowledgement that this is a complex disaster, and we need to understand that complexity. I believe that sometimes we take safety a little bit too simplified. And we do need to bring in, as I said, the systemic thinking, not only the compartmentalized. And our safety and risk assessments need also to take into the dynamic of the human and the organizational factors in a better way than it does. So, how do we do then? How do we enhance proactivity and build resilience capabilities? I will just give you a few ideas. And I want to give you a quote from a lady, an expert. She's been working with organizational culture leadership, not in safety only, but I like her approach because she's very hands-on. And she's saying that when working with complexity, you need to simplify to make it manageable. This is a paradox. I just said the opposite, didn't I? If you haven't read Managing the Unexpected by Wake and Sutcliffe, I recommend it. One of their principles is that reluctance to simplify. But we do need to simplify and then open up for the complexity. Because if it's too complex, what can we do? It's just loose cues. So we need to have a structured way and a simple way when we work with complexity. One thing that we've been talking about is collaboration. At the IEA, we have created a concept that we call shared space. It's a concept that actually should be experience-based when you learn it, but I will try to explain it. The idea is that we pay attention to what is between us, the gap between us, the shared space, so to speak, between me and you, between colleagues, groups, organizations, that we pay attention to what is in between there. And if we do that, and we also try to foster good working relationship that is support trust, that we try to decrease the power dynamics, that we have mutual respect, and that we have openness, free flow of thoughts, really the inner thoughts, those that we usually don't share, that you will do in a good shared space. Or ideas, maybe crazy ideas. But maybe most important is maybe that we share the feelings. An example could be that if you have a good shared space and you're going to send off somebody out on the platform to do a work, and before he leaves to do his work, you ask, how do you feel about the job you're going to do now? He might answer, well, it's quite a long time since I did this, so I'm not really sure. That might save the situation. To take 5 minutes, walk through the procedure, and then let the person go out. We usually don't in the nuclear industry, and I guess it's the same in your industry, talk about emotions. But we have a lot of knowledge in intelligence in our emotions. So a good shared space allows that to happen. Maybe you've been in a decision-making, operational decision-making, where you don't have all the facts, and it's very difficult but you need to take, because of the time pressure, you need to take the decision. Then you can walk around the table and ask, what do you feel about the decision we took, or we are going to take? And one by one, and maybe the fifth person would say, well, I have a little bit of a gut feeling, I don't know what it is, because it's not intellectualized yet. And that might be the cue for, wait a minute, 3 years ago we had a similar situation. And that might bring up a lot of other facts that maybe changed the whole decision that was going to happen. So shared space goes deeper than sharing facts. It's really about having a dialogue, to listen, big ears and little mouth. So keep it simple. This is an idea about how you can keep it simple, but also make the difference, that we do have a structure, we have the progression, we have the interrelationship, and we do have different tools for these three. So the structure is these things that we create to make it stable. We have the management system, we have the procedures, we have the policies, and so on. We have the KPIs, and we have all that things are the structure. The red part is the culture or the interrelationships. It's what happens in between us, the shared space, and it's more based towards emotion and our the norms, the values, and assumptions. The progression, how we learn, how we connect and synthesize, and how the organization is learning. So I will let you talk a little bit around the tables of what of those do you think is the most important for safety? Which of those three? And you have to choose one. Okay? I give you 2 minutes. Have a talk around the table. What do you think is the most important for safety? Is it the structure, the blue, or is it the red, the culture, or is it the progression, the learning part? Okay, thank you. All right. So let's see. How many in the room think that blue is the most important for safety? How many in the room think that the red is important for safety? Okay. And how many think green is most important? Okay, thank you. So which of those three do you think you are measured on? Is it the blue? Is it the red? Or is it the green as manager or as co-worker? What are you measured on? Blue? Yes. Yes. So you concluded what I wanted you to conclude. Red matters for safety. And as a final words, I just want to say that I really believe that we need to be better and more innovative to create better and smarter tools. There are already tools that we could use for safety, which is green and red tools. But it needs to be an integrated part of how we do work, because nobody have time or effort or resources, and it's not effective to have a standalone program for safety culture. Or we need it to be a part of, as you have already placed here on your posters. And there are things like that. And it's also important to think about the generation change. I guess, like in the nuclear industry, we see more and more young people coming, and they have other demands. They do really have other demands. So we need to meet that up too. And the day when the nuclear was built, at least, there was quite much resources. That's not the case any longer. The energy prices has gone down. So we need to be smarter in the way we work, but with safety, and that is a good business. Thank you very much for listening. It was nice to be here. Thank you.